Hello. Another year, another dollar, which at the time of writing was around 79 pence, but by the time you hear this, could be £2.50, such is the volatility of the world stage. Recent events would seem to suggest that the old adage, a week is a long time in politics, is about as accurate as Brexit is succinct. Leaders seem to come and go with depressing or is that rejuvenating regularity? Depends on your viewpoint. Though, on the UK shores, the Prime Minister was still clinging on, limpet-like. Of course, by the time you're listening to this, she may well have been prized free by some form of opposition, or indeed just booted off by her own party. Ah, Brexit. If ever one subject had the power to intrigue, confuse, enthrall, terrify, mystify, irritate, and bore the pants off us simultaneously, this surely was it. After 2 years of intense negotiation, heartache, headaches, arguments, and countless resignations, we're seemingly no nearer an agreement than we were at the beginning. Chiefly, it's become abundantly clear because such an agreement, which would leave all parties on both sides of both argument and channel satisfied, doesn't actually exist. We may leave without an agreement, we may not. We may have another referendum, or not. We may have another leader of the Tory party, or not. Or indeed a new Prime Minister, or not. Or everything might be saved by a few amendments scribbled on the back of a fag packet at the 11th hour, 59th minute and 59th second, whenever that might be. Of course, the whole thing could be fake news. Who knows? Who knows if the fake news is indeed fake, or those who bring us the fake news are indeed sincere in their fakery? Is the fake news fake? Against this slightly less than promising background, the Isle of Man continues to try to place itself on the world stage. 1,000 years of comparative stability may be a good starting block for this challenge, but it may be no more than a flotation aid in a sea of uncertainty. And yet, amazingly, life continues on the Isle of Man in all its forms, and over the next 50 minutes or so we'll have a glance at just a few of the notable issues on Manx shores during 2018. For many, perhaps, one of the biggest issues of the year was abortion reform, highly contentious for some, long overdue for others. Oft discussed over the years, 2018 was the year where it actually came to pass. Aaron Ibanez has the story.
Of course, the story of abortion for any woman begins with a choice. And for those on the Isle of Man, it was argued that access to that choice was unnecessarily hard to get to. Despite being legal, it was only permitted in limited circumstances. It therefore required a journey for some, which was made all the more isolating by having to undergo the procedure by travelling to the UK. But on Tynwald Day, the 5th of July last year, a stand was made which got the public's attention, and it came in the form of the Handmaids. It was the most poignant demonstration since 1991, where Alan Shea donned his striped pyjamas and took to the hill in protest of the island's draconian laws which criminalised homosexuality. The 5 handmaids, characters of Margaret Atwood's dystopian world, stood with their faces veiled as silent symbols to draw attention to the lack of reproductive rights for Manx women.
It's completely wrong that we have to make this protest, that we have such restriction of choice on the Isle of Man. We shouldn't be lagging behind when we've been so progressive in so many ways. One of the first countries in the world to give women the vote, one of the longest, obviously the longest parliament, and yet here we are, that women do not have the choice of what to do with their own bodies, and other people are trying to dictate to them what they can and can't do.
Looking to deliver on a promise, one MHK set reform in motion.
I don't see what I'm doing here as courageous in any way. I think it's our responsibility as parliamentarians, and the real courage is shown by the women battling for abortion rights on this island. You, in an email, accused me of trying to rush through the legislation. There is no rush in the legislative process of this House, and I think there's plenty of time for scrutiny and debate with all the laws we go through, whether it's the dog law, whether it's the treasure law. That's the way this Parliament has been created, and that's probably why it's the longest serving Parliament in the world.
The member for Ramsey, Dr Alex Allinson, who put abortion on the Keys agenda for 2017, took his proposed abortion reform bill to public consultation, and it was from here the debate intensified.
The unborn child in the womb is not being taken into consideration. It is a human being, a developing human being, And this must not be forgotten. We are a caring society. We are human beings.
If you don't want an abortion, if you're against the idea of an abortion, don't have an abortion. But what this legislation is proposing is the ability for women to make the choice in a way that's safe for them and that's accessible for them.
So how else are they going to get that message across?
I understand that. I understand that shock tactics are the way. But
Is it shock tactics or is it just reality?
I think it's misleading.
The other issue that you said in terms of controversy, I'm afraid that the media often portray abortion as being two camps constantly at war, and we've seen that with the demonstrations. That's true. There are people with quite absolute views on this, of both sides. But I think what the public consultation showed is that the vast majority of people on the Isle of Man actually want reform, that our
Results published in October showed 3,500 people responded to the consultation exercise, where overwhelmingly 87% were in favour of change. It justified Dr. Allinson's belief for far-reaching abortion law reform on the island.
I've been criticised for being far too liberal and also far too conservative. I'm never going to satisfy everyone, but what I hope we can do by doing the public consultation, by taking on board all those comments, is provide a service that actually respects women's right to choose, trusts them to make the right decision and supports them to do that.
Branded extreme and dangerous by pro-life groups, by February of this year, the bill passed its second reading unanimously in the House of Keys, in spite of attempts from East Douglas MHK Chris Robertshaw to refer the bill to a select committee for further examination. It then entered the clauses stage, where members heard testimonies from a human rights activist, a gynaecologist, and UK Labour peer Lord Brennan QC. Debates on the finer details were lengthy, but by May, members supported the third reading of Dr. Allinson's bill, which passed with 22 votes to 2. It then moved to the Legislative Council for its final stages of scrutiny, where more witnesses were brought in to give evidence, of them a law lecturer, a pharmacist and Christian professor. But it was by the end of June the bill passed the test of LegCo, which made 80 amendments for recommendation for Keys to ultimately approve. As anticipated after a summer recess, the abortion reform bill returned to the fore, and on the 6th of November 2018, it passed the final hurdle.
The abortion bill has now gone for royal assent and will shortly become law, though, as Aaron reflected in his report, for those opposed to the law, the battle continues. Mental health is a topic which affects each and every one of us in one way or another. Depression and anxiety can affect anyone, anytime, and can have devastating effects. Yet, we still struggle to cope with the issue on an individual basis and how to treat it on a national level. Whilst we may not have crossed a watershed in 2018, it does at least feel as if the tide is turning to make it an issue that is deserving of a place much higher on the public agenda. Alex Watton has been exploring the issue of mental health and some of the stigma surrounding it.
Had certain doctors, A&E doctors,
I wouldn't say
for
I've been
example,
singled
that
out,
told me that
but
they don't believe in
I would
mental
say that
health.
there's a lot of
almost came on
the
experiences I was
feeling, you know, so like becoming really hard,
panicking
quite a lot, accordingly in a way that's not
eating very well,
and it almost became normal for me, and it wasn't until I
It's okay not to be okay. You may have heard this phrase before. It certainly took social media by storm this World Mental Health Day, with hashtag It's Okay Not to Be Okay trending worldwide. And while this rhetoric is undoubtedly a positive one, what does not being okay really mean? Because I don't know about you, but everyone I seem to speak to seems to be fine.
Hi Tim, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Hi Chris, how are you?
Hi, I'm well, thanks.
Hiya, how are you?
I'm okay, how are you?
Hello Alex, I'm fine, thank you. How are you, Alex?
I'm excellent, thank you very much. Hey Mark, how's it going?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
Morning. I'm very well, thank you. Busy.
But that's not the real picture, is it? And nor should we believe it is, because according to a House of Commons report, an estimated 1 in 6 people experienced a common mental disorder like depression or anxiety in the past week. So either we're lying to each other or something else is going on. Something much deeper and much more difficult to change. I'm talking about stigma. The Minister for Health and Social Care is David Ashford.
I believe we are seeing changes. Maybe not as fast as I and others would potentially like, but we have to be realistic about what we can do in the timescales, and those changes will continue.
Wouldn't it be more sensible or more financially beneficial for government now to put a relatively large cash injection into improving the current services we have, so later down the line we're not spending millions of pounds on a situation that's got out of control?
Well, cash injections are all very well, but they've got to actually be aimed in the right areas and deliver on that. I think what we need to do is also develop a well-being strategy and stop people becoming mentally ill in the first place. It's all very well pumping money in to treat people after the fact, but we've got to try and mitigate it beforehand, early intervention. In the past, I think the focus has been on treating people after the problem has occurred. What I want to do is, over my time, however long or short that may be as Minister, flip that on its head and look at trying to deal with coping mechanisms and early intervention.
The world out there for a teenager is a very difficult world now. You have to be tough, pretty tough.
Lorna Fairclough is a director of Manx charity Parent to Parent, which supports those with children struggling with their mental health.
I've got a son who's 26 and a daughter who's 17, so there's a big gap between, and I can tell you now the difference in schools and what they offer in the times that they've both been through school is completely different. It's always been a struggle. In the teenage years have always been up and down, and as a parent, you expect your child to be, grumpy. Don't you expect the slamming of doors and that sort of thing? But what you don't expect is for them to reach a point where they don't want to be here anymore. Believe me, as a parent, when you experience that, when your child says they literally don't like life and they don't want to be here anymore, what do you do with that? Where do you go with that? Even the school struggle with, what do you do with that? But for them to reach that point, they've gone through a period of time of very low mood and difficult times. You don't become suicidal overnight. There's normally a build-up to it. And that's because a lot of it is early intervention.
I attended on the 9th of October the first ever Global Ministerial Summit down in London on mental health.
The Health Minister.
And one of the key things that was put across there is that early intervention is the key. And one of the things in the next financial year that I want to focus on within the department is not just early intervention in mental health, but early intervention in things across the department. I think that's got to be a theme for next year.
With the numbers I've been given from CAMHS, from any age up to 18, 5.9% of the island's under 18s are using CAMHS open cases.
Right, well, I need to clarify that because, of course, one of the things you've got to remember is, as I said before, autism and other sort of conditions such as that are included within those numbers. So whereas you look at the headline figures, it sounds exceptionally scary that you're saying 5% of all children are in CAMHS.
5.9.
Or they're not necessarily in there for what a lot of people out there would see as mental health problems. So we need to get better as well in defining what people are in there. So, for instance, mental health with children is tiered. So you've got the tier 1 that basically is those that are suicidal risks, all the way down to behavioural problems. Now, when you look at the figures and you break them out by the tiers, it gives a very different picture.
In England, the NHS reported secondary mental health, learning disabilities and autism services, so bringing in all the things you just mentioned. The number of 18s using those services in England is 4.5%.
Yeah.
So that's still 1.5% above England.
But also don't forget as well, history shows, and if you look at other small jurisdictions as well, there's a lot of cases that are more easily identified and referred in. In larger jurisdictions, you tend to find they go further towards crisis point before the child presents.
There's a phrase that we all know, but we just don't associate with mental health, and it's a problem shared is a problem halved.
David Beeney is from Breaking the Silence, a company he set up after battling with mental health problems for more than 30 years.
As a mental health counsellor, all of my clients are in therapy because of something they've held on to for years, and sometimes for good reason. We call it talking therapy because the moment people start to talk, they generally start to feel better, with men in particular. There's two horrible statistics. Nearly 8 out of 10 suicides are male. And the biggest killer of men under 50, for men who die under 50, is suicide. More than road traffic accidents and more than cancer. And it's because men are rubbish at talking about things. So we're told it's weak to cry, but we've got to get better at displaying our emotions. That's why so many men end up taking their own lives so sadly. I get so frustrated that if I woke up this morning with a bad throat, I think about going to see my doctor within 24 hours. If I woke up this morning with symptoms of depression, I would wait on average 6 to 8 years before I get professional help, because we just don't go and talk about things. We just don't treat mental health in the same way we look after our physical health.
Although the conversation has clearly started, talking about our mental health appears to be the very first step to recovery, and indeed the very hardest. This is just a snapshot of what's happening here in the Isle of Man, and there is plenty more going on that I haven't been able to discuss. For now, though, thank you again for listening, and please keep talking.
And as Alex says, talking is perhaps a great starting point for dealing with any mental health issues. It is, as a well-known phone company once said, good to talk. In another, darker side of Manx life, it seems several people have been talking for some time without anyone listening. The issue in question, abuse of youngsters in care on the island at the former government children's home at Notfield in Douglas. One man who heard what they had to say was chairman of the Social Affairs Policy Review Committee, David Cretney MLC, who starts this report by Donald Mercer.
I agree. I understand and I believe the people who've been in front of us and who have given us their statements, either in private or today in public. I believe them.
On Thursday, the 3rd of May 2018, Chairman of the Social Affairs Policy Review Committee, David Cretney MLC, told Manx Radio he believed what he'd been hearing. Earlier that day, Mr Cretney and Julie Edge MHK met in public with 2 former residents of Notfield who were victims of physical, emotional and sexual abuse during their childhoods at the hands of Joseph Henry Marshall.
Mr Cretney, Select Committee, the police and the people of our island, I ask for recognition for what had happened, justice for the innocent victims and hopefully closure. This dark chapter of our island's social and criminal history must be recognised and documented, and where appropriate, action taken. You owe it to a generation of vulnerable young children who, under the care of this Isle of Man government, were sent to Notfield in the 1960s and 70s. That unregulated, inadequate, uncaring children's home where a paedophile was free to ruin countless young lives. You owe it to us and the silent victims.
The oral evidence given in the Legislative Council chamber formed part of an investigation by the committee. In July 2017, Tynwald tasked them with producing a report on historical child abuse at the children's home, following a successful motion by Eyre and Michael MHK Tim Baker.
Please defeat the amendment, support the motion and demonstrate that we are an inclusive and caring court, that we will listen to those whose voices have not been heard, that we will stand up for what is right and that we are prepared to address past wrongs. Thank you, honourable members, on behalf of all those who have suffered injustice over the years at Notfield. There are people who are still living on this island who were in care at Notfield, and there's very, very strong evidence of abuse of residents at that home. I've been trying for a period of about 8 months on the back of discussions with a constituent. He's close to a number of people who are in a similar situation who said to me that this happened and yet there's been no official acknowledgement of it and I need closure.
Mr Baker's motion only narrowly got through. The Council of Ministers and members from the Departments of Health and Home Affairs voted en masse for an amendment by the then Health Minister Kate Beecroft, which would have resulted in no further investigation into the matter. But get through it did, and it was originally hoped a report could be formulated by December 2017. The committee was also tasked with investigating the adequacy of current procedures to protect from abuse children in care in the Isle of Man, and to report by March 2018. The process was delayed due to ongoing criminal proceedings. Fast forward to October 2018, that report into historical child abuse has been published. Sian Cowper joins me. Sian, first of all, this is a sizable document and will take members some time to digest.
Yes, absolutely. It's been compiled in 2 volumes totalling around 690 pages.
And what does that include?
The document outlines the history of Notfield, assesses each of the people that have run the children's home, details previous criminal investigations, provides a comprehensive overview of the work of the committee in its investigation, and ultimately provides a series of recommendations.
So, what do those recommendations cover?
Well, there are 11 in total. First and foremost, the report calls upon Tynwald to make a formal public acknowledgement of the failures of the island's public authorities over many decades to detect and prevent the abuse of children in the home. Don't forget that Notfield was a state-run facility. It also asks Tynwald to apologise for the failure to bring the perpetrators of abuse to justice and to provide support and assistance to individuals who have been abused. Other recommendations cover the privacy of those giving evidence, proposals about reviews to legislation, and ideas of ways in which the justice system can learn from past failures looking to the future.
And we've already heard one apology from the Chief Constable Gary Roberts, of course, during his oral evidence.
I do not ordinarily support the concept of contemporary leaders apologising for failures or for shortcomings in how things were done in the distant past. However, I'm as clear as I can possibly be that I deeply regret any failures on the part of the police 40 years or more ago that prevented the victims of Marshall getting at that time the justice that they so obviously and deeply deserved.
What's said about the former residents of Notfield themselves?
As well as underlining the right to privacy of adults in the island who, as children, were abused, and reaffirming their right to be heard and supported if they do disclose abuse, the report also suggests that the Attorney-General and Treasury should review the sums payable under the criminal injuries compensation schemes so that they properly reflect the degree of pain and suffering caused by abuse and neglect during childhood, as they are today understood.
And what of Joseph Henry Marshall?
The report acknowledges that Mr Marshall, who ran the home with his wife from 1973 to 1983, was convicted of crimes relating to Notfield in 1992, 13 offences, which the report says was only a tiny fraction of the number of offences he actually committed. It's thought an opportunity to stop Mr Marshall was missed in the late 1970s when a child reported sexual abuse to the police. That failure was one of the reasons for the Chief Constable's fairly unprecedented public apology. The report says Marshall did not only perpetrate abuse himself, but tolerated others' abusive behaviour, including other employees of the home, by other children in the home, by other adults, both familiar and strangers, both on and off the island. Further police investigations have taken place since the early 90s, but despite strong evidence, the matter didn't proceed to trial. It's thought this was primarily because of Marshall's age and medical condition. The report recommends that the approach to crime against children should be rigorous, irrespective of the age and state of health of any alleged perpetrator. Many feel the punishment does not match the crime, and Marshall's sentencing of 3 years in prison in the early 90s was drastically insufficient. Joseph Marshall remains a resident of the Isle of Man.
The issue remains ongoing. It may be difficult to remember now, as you see your car floating down the road, but earlier this year there was something of a shortage of water on the Isle of Man, as we endured something of a drought. I know, difficult to picture it, but it did happen. And this is something which Manx Radio's man-in-line producer and Manx Radio's favourite scholar, William King, picked up on as he looked back at some of the issues that had stuck in his mind during 2018. Curiously, at least one of them concerned beer.
On the 3rd of July, whilst the northwest of England endured a hosepipe ban, Dr Alex Allinson, chair of Manx Utilities, claimed that there was no need for one on the island, as the reservoirs were sufficiently stocked.
What we're doing is pumping from one reservoir to the other to keep the levels constant, make sure that people have enough water. But we need to use that water efficiently. There's no plans to have any hosepipe ban or anything like that, as they're doing across at the moment in various areas. But we are asking people to think what they do before they just turn the tap on and leave it to run, so that we can conserve those supplies and keep the water flowing.
Then, at the end of July, the Ramsey MHK was back on Manx Radio, announcing that a hosepipe ban would run. He spoke to John Moss.
You must have seen this coming with this weather.
Unfortunately, I suppose, yes, we were worried that we might have to bring a hosepipe ban. I was on your radio show a month ago saying everything was fine. In May, we had 100% reservoirs. What we've got now, Solby's 60% full, West Baldwin's 58% full. So no major crisis, but the big thing that's changed is the weather forecast, particularly the long-range weather forecast. We started off thinking, it's a nice TT, we're having loads of sunshine. What we haven't had is any consistent rain.
We heard Dr. Allinson mention the weather there. Here's Adrian Cowan speaking to Tim Glover at the time.
We were seeing very, very unusually high evaporation rates. The evaporation rates for June, for instance, peaked at between 120 and 140 millimetres equivalent rainfall was lost just by evaporation.
So what's ahead for us?
So what's ahead? There's only a 40% probability of near normal rainfall. There's about a 35% probability of below normal rainfall. And to be quite honest, even normal rainfall would not cut the mustard to help us out in this situation anymore.
So a dry summer. During the extended summer of heat, the fire brigade were warning people to be careful about having barbecues and enjoying the high temperatures. Tweets included, the Isle of Man Fire and Rescue Service wished to remind the public to not have any form of open fires or barbecues during this dry spell. Yellow warning signs were erected around the island's wilderness, which read, high risk of wildfire, no smoking, no campfires, no camp stoves, no barbecues. Then, the Minister for the Environment, Geoffrey Boot, tweeted a picture of him having a barbecue on a field. He admitted it wasn't the most intelligent move, but defended himself.
We had a water container with us, and as soon as we'd finished and eaten our food, we extinguished the barbecue and also watered the area underneath to make sure that there were no flames. So I would say to people, wherever they're doing that, that's a sensible precaution. The field itself that we were in was very green. It was not one of these tinder dry fields. We were away from any undergrowth as well. So they're all sensible precautions, and in retrospect, I agree, probably not the best post of my life.
On the 24th of September, Dr. Allinson was back to announce the good news. The ban had been lifted. It was time for Manx National Wash Your Car Day.
We're confident now we've got enough water to see us through the winter, even if it's a dry winter, and we're quite happy to lift the hosepipe ban, but we would still say for people to use the water wisely.
The period of drought hadn't been easy for farmers or other people who required lots of water for their livelihoods. People adapted, however, and Douglas Borough Council tweeted, the use of non-drinking water for the irrigation of floral displays will commence from Saturday the 4th of August until the hosepipe ban is lifted. It is thought that farmers will see the effect of this summer's weather for years to come. In March this year, there was an election to the Legislative Council. 15 people contested 5 seats. A change to the electoral procedure meant that MHKs would be able to vote for all 15 candidates. The Minister for Policy and Reform is Chris Thomas, and he spoke to James Davis.
Basically, we each can vote for every candidate, and we'll then have to find out the 5 that are most attractive to us.
That's farcical, isn't it? I mean, there's 5 vacancies. You should be able to vote for 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 or abstain, but certainly not for more than 5.
That was one possibility, but the committee recommended to the House of Keys, the Standing Orders Committee that is, on which I serve, they recommended this way forward. It might be different in the future, but that's the electoral system that we use this time.
In the end, the election in a special sitting of the House of Keys took only 15 minutes. Here's Dewan Watterson, Speaker of the House, when he announced the result.
Mrs Poole Wilson received 22 votes, Mrs Lord Brennan received 16 votes, Mrs Humbles received 15 votes, Mrs Hendy received 14 votes, Mrs Sharp received 13 votes, Mr Cartledge received 12 votes, Mrs Corlett received 10 votes, Mrs Jockin received 9 votes, Mr Kelly and Mrs Chambers received 7 votes, Mr Skinner received 6 votes, Mr Ramsey and Mrs Wheeler both received 5 votes, and Mr Furner and Mr Hardy both received 4 votes.
Jane Paul Wilson, who topped the poll, was re-elected, and 4 others, Kate Lord-Brennan, Tanya August-Hanson, Marlene Hendy and Kerry Sharp, were elected to the upper house with no prior parliamentary experience. Mrs Paul Wilson told Manx Radio at the time that Legco's new look should be applauded.
I don't see this as a vote for women per se. I think the candidates we had in this election were all extremely capable, and I think it's a really positive step that we had so many capable candidates, and a large number of them were women or are women, and I'm really delighted that we've attracted so many capable women candidates and that they've received the support.
Turning to another story, this time again from the summer. In July last year, it was announced that Bushy's beer tent would not return to the Bottleneck car park for TT 2018. Instead, rival brewers Hooded Ram signed a contract, meaning they would run the Bottleneck tent until 2021. Mr Brunchweiler spoke to Manx Radio, remaining upbeat.
Hand on heart, every single one is, each site is superior to the Bottleneck, and I'm not sure that we would go back to it now. I think we have in our minds, we've moved on. We know the limitations of the Bottleneck. We've had a few approaches to put things on, attractions, and which we've had to steer away from because of the restricted size.
Then it was announced in September last year the Villa Marina Gardens would be the home of Bushy's for 2018. When Hooded Ram revealed their plans, they'd suggested having a 2-storey tent, although this didn't come to fruition. As well as local acts, professional bands from the UK headlined Hooded Ram's offering. These included Scouting for Girls and Fun-Loving Criminals, who both rocked the tent's 2,800 revellers. Bushy's stuck to local acts at their TT village, where bands such as the Tides played. In both offerings, there was no shortage of atmosphere. In Bushy's, local artisan vendors catered for almost 12,000 visitors, whilst Jeff the Mongoose hosted a corporate tent on the colonnade. In the end, the Battle of the Beer Tents created more variety at the TT this year, and Bushy's and Hooded Ram are both planning to continue with their current setup for next year at least.
Now that may remain to be seen, William. We live in hope. Of course, an issue which came up during this year's festival was the number of plastic beer mugs which are used during the festival, and more to the point, what happens to them after they've been used. And we're not just talking about beer mugs. Plastic in general, our over-dependence on its use and willingness to dump it without thought has been very much to the fore throughout 2018. You could say 2018 was the year when the message that people like David Attenborough on a global level and Bill Dale on a more local one had been trying to drive home for years suddenly began to resonate with the public. Aaron Ibanez has more.
Since its invention some 100 years ago, plastic has become an integral part of our daily lives. But every year, some 8 million tonnes of it ends up in the ocean. And there, it can be lethal.
Documenting the issue of plastic and the grim reality of human excess spilling into the natural world has been responsible for many a watershed moment.
She is reluctant to let it go and has been carrying it around for many days.
None more so than this episode of Blue Planet, where a mother pilot whale is seen grieving over her calf, thought to have died as a result of ocean contamination. Along with Attenborough, Liz Bonnen, in her documentary Drowning in Plastics, showed us the heart and stomach-wrenching scene of a shearwater chick vomiting up marine debris.
Oh,
and look at that stomach full of plastic.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Size of that piece. Sharp too.
Instilled them with this part of the global picture for the Isle of Man's environmentalists, filmmakers, scientists, and even its politicians. 2018 was the time to act local.
Where do we go from here?
Producing 1 million plastic bottles a minute at the moment around the world. I mean, it is mad.
They're estimating that they'll hang around in our seas and our landfill for 500 years. I mean, these plastics have only been around on the Earth 50, 60 years, so do we really know how long they're going to last?
We're not in isolation despite being an island, and I think we need to bring it home and emphasise, sometimes with some graphic examples of
Sometimes people need a little gentle
persuasion. So maybe that needs to come from businesses or from
We can make a
government
difference, even if it's only a small difference, if we all do one little thing.
The plan focuses on reducing the use of single-use plastics within government. This ban...
I mean, I like to think of it as if you walked into your kitchen and you realised that your sink had flooded the whole kitchen. You wouldn't get out the mops and start cleaning up the water before you turned off the tap. So we've got to turn off the tap and change the way that we're living our lives through industry, government and ourselves, and then we could think about any potential solutions out there. But we don't want to keep adding to the problem that we're already so aware of. And we've got this kind of throwaway culture. And when you are away from civilization and you're in such a remote region, you're still seeing the impacts of humans. It kind of really brings it home that we really need to start thinking about our impact on the planet, because the health of our oceans are the health of us. They directly impact the health of us. So it's about helping people to realise that and make that connection and make those changes in their lives.
Not to discredit or take away from what Beach Buddies have been doing, we now lay claim to the cleanest beaches in the world, and I think that's fair to say. However, I know Rowan Henthorne has echoed the same sentiment that Liz Bonnen has said in that documentary about turning off the tap. It's all well and good cleaning up after this mess, but as consumers, where does our power lie now to start lobbying the bigger people in changing habit?
I think the power lies with at the very grassroots, and that's why we're doing this, is to go to schools and talk to children, because a generation has allowed this to happen. This nonsense has happened in the last 20, 30 years. Everybody, I don't mean politicians, everybody's got to wake up, even us guys are going out cleaning the beaches all the time. We've got to wake up to the fact that things need to change, and although we're doing a great job here, that's not actually changing the source of where this comes from.
This year saw some of the island's businesses ditch plastic straws and its supermarkets levy charges for plastic bags. And while Bill Dale and the tens of thousands of Manx people kept the beaches clean, Environment Minister Geoffrey Boot saw Tynwald unanimously back his department's plan to ban single-use plastics across government. That will come into effect by next year.
Chief Minister who initiated this strategy felt that government should set an example. On a small island, it's easy for us to contain and do what we're doing within government. When I say that, it hasn't proved to be quite as easy as we thought it would be. But yes, we need to set an example and set a course for the future.
It was a move welcomed by the Manx Wildlife Trust, but it insisted more far-reaching legislation would be needed to cut the amount of plastic waste on the island.
It's purely getting people to understand the issue and getting people to understand how easy it is for them to make a change and to do things differently. We have grown up, certainly my generation have just grown up with plastics, and we've grown up with that ease of use, that just throwaway mentality, and that's what we've got to change. We've got to change that mindset that it's not okay to buy something in a plastic wrapper and then throw that plastic wrapper away, even if it goes into recycling.
The whole food industry is rapidly developing plastic-free solutions, and we will adopt these as soon as they become available and financially viable for producers.
Meanwhile, in the EU, legislation was passed that would outlaw single-use plastics by 2021, something Bill Shimon's MHK thought the island ought to adopt.
Well, unfortunately, we're a bit behind the curve on a number of these issues, so I want to ensure that we don't fall further behind. And as a biosphere nation and as a maritime island, it's important that we take a leadership approach on the reduction of single-use plastics.
Initiatives in the form of contests and reuse schemes were led by businesses at home and away to tackle disposable culture.
What we thought was really critical was to sort of look at the market and see how we could optimise that and make it more convenient for consumers to be part of this reusable revolution.
And back from her expedition to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the island's newly appointed ecosystems manager Rowan Henthorne had this message.
I think the idea behind this plastic reduction, it should be exciting because it's innovation and it's about thinking about the way that we design and use products and kind of moving forward and creating a world that we're depending less on these unnecessary use of plastics.
Let's just hope, rather like the climate, that if habits are changed now, the damage already done can be slowly reversed. Now, what about sporting endeavours, I hear you cry? Surely no look back at the year would be complete without a glance at least at the ever-impressive achievements of our sportsmen and women. An easy task, one would think, for our sports editor, the calibre of Chris Cave.
Reflecting back on sporting achievements over a 12-month period is an incredibly difficult task to carry out, as there's always so much that happens. It just so happens 2018 brought with it a very special year for Manx sport, with plenty to keep us entertained, shocked, delighted, devastated, delirious and on the edge of our seats, all the emotions that are experienced in sport. It's mood swings and dramas such as this, which means it's no surprise I'll be bald by the time I'm 30. This was also a very special year, as it was a Commonwealth Games year, allowing Manx athletes to represent their homeland on the biggest stage possible, pitting themselves against some of the very best and most high-profile sports stars on the planet. More than 40 athletes met the qualifying criteria to be named in Team Isle of Man for the event, which this year was staged on Australia's Gold Coast. The main headline when the squad was announced was that the Isle of Man's very own celebrity sports star would be leading the line, as Manx missile Mark Cavendish, the last man to win a gold medal for the island at the Commonwealth Games, was included. Cav, along with so many others, was then left disappointed after a crash at the Milan-San Remo ruled him out of competing. 8 sports were to be contested by our local heroes at the Games: athletics, badminton, cycling, gymnastics, lawn bowls, shooting, swimming and triathlon, thousands of miles away from our tiny little island in the middle of the Irish Sea in an extremely unfamiliar climate. All the sports were contested on the biggest stage, with the Aussies putting on a quite spectacular event where those at the peak of their powers battled it out to be crowned champion. As is always the case in sport, when someone finishes an event with a sense of euphoria, it means there will be another athlete who's given everything and missed out by the narrowest of margins. That's what happened for swimmer Charlotte Atkinson, who earlier in January this year added more medals to her growing list of honours. She picked up a bronze in both the 50 and 200 metre butterfly events at the 2018 Euro Swim in Luxembourg. But unfortunately for her, at the Commonwealth Games, she missed out on a podium finish by fractions of a second in both the 100 and 200 metre fly finals.
I mean, it was faster this morning. I gave it my all, so that's all I could do. And the 4th place is better than my 5th place in the 100, so that's a positive.
You've come so close twice now. You must be wondering what more you have to do to win a medal at the Commonwealth Games.
I don't know. I mean, I did better than Glasgow, and I think I swam it better, but I don't know, just got to say, carry on.
Overcome with emotion following the event, I hope now, over the festive period, she's had time to reflect on what an amazing achievement it was for her just to get to the final, let alone come so close to medalling. Her performances down under made her the first Manx woman since Alexandra Jackson in 1970 to get to an individual swimming final at the Games. 2 days later, however, and jubilation was the overriding feeling in Team Isle of Man, as Tim Neal shot to silver in the double trap, sparking equally emotional scenes. He gave his first interview following that performance to Manx Radio.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to say. It's pretty emotional to come here and represent the island and come back with a medal, yeah. You've kind of caught me at the wrong time.
You had to dig deep early on, a shaky start I think to say the least, but you really pulled it out the bag and to qualify a flawless shoot in your final round. Did you take that confidence into this final this evening?
Yeah, I mean it's a difficult range to shoot, so during training everyone I think just thought if you could just grind out some consistent scores, you'd be thereabouts in the final. So a 25 personally was a big blow, but looking back it was it was start of that consistency, I suppose, to back it up with all 26s and then finish on that high.
And how special is this moment for you, considering shooting won't be at the Olympics or indeed at the Commonwealth Games in 4 years' time in Birmingham?
Yeah, it's a real special moment, to be honest. I've been on a long journey to get here. Now, I suppose, and our coach, Ed Barker, when I first competed in Melbourne in 2016, or 2006, sorry, his dad was the coach, who'd been my coach for a long time as well, but, unfortunately he passed away after the Rio Games, so it's, just the last sort of 2 years has been a real struggle to get here, really, so to kind of come away with some silverware is fantastic as well, and, to kind of be here wearing the Manx flag and putting us on the stage, it's fantastic.
Tim Neal's silver on the 10th day of the Games turned out to be the only medal success for the Manx athletes, but every single one of them was entitled to return to the island with their head held high after giving their all in Australia. With the nature of a review such as this, it ultimately means some sporting stories won't get the limelight they require. Richard Gerrard romped to a 5th Parish Walk triumph in style in May, ahead of the previous winner Liam Parker by more than half an hour. Bernie Johnson won the female category, as more than 1,200 took part in the event. The next major sporting event that took place on the island, and one that can never be excluded when talking about Manx sport, was obviously the TT. Bathing in sunshine and with 2 riders in particular, Dean Harrison and Peter Hickman, going at it hammer and tongs, the fortnight was destined for an enthralling feast of racing. This should help recap the historic TT of 2018.
Sorry, I know it's 6:24. We're going to throw in another 2 or 3 minutes, guys. We're just getting this oil finished off between Cronimona and Signpost. Then we've got another couple of marshals to move around the course due to some shortages. So bear with me. We're almost there.
They're on the way, Chris. Keep your ears pinned because Harrison, Cummins, Hickman and Nina are all showing us through Cronimona.
Here we go, you can hear them in the distance. What is this lap going to be?
Yeah, give us a wave. It's actually the first time I've had a pair of leathers on since May 2017. I've never had a suit on. I've never stuck my leg over the Norton before. So, the first time I ride it Stanbray Hill, so no pressure.
Get ready, folks. He's getting ready to go. He's waving to people. Here we go.
Hillier 131.150. That's Dean Harrison. It's 134.432 miles per hour. A new outright lap record for Dean Harrison. 16 minutes 50.384. And we're going to see Michael Dunlop cross the line first. That's for you, Dan Dean.
And it is Peter Hickman who leads at Ramsey by 0.8 of a second.
The next machine interview, is this Peter Hickman? Yes, it is. Peter Hickman. Checkered flag is ready for him. Is it a debut first maiden TT win for Peter Hickman? He crosses the line now. 134.403. You are the senior PokerStars champion. You're the fastest road racer in the world as well. 135.452 miles per hour.
When a sudden red flag went up just half an hour into the practice session, there was a distinct and hauntingly familiar feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. Then there was silence, and shortly after 9 o'clock, our worst fears were confirmed. Following a crash at Churchtown, Manx rider Dan Neen had died. After an otherwise perfect start to the TT, last night was a reminder both of the spirit of the event and all the exemplar people who take part in it, but also of the risks and of the devastating tragedy that can lie around any bend in an event like this. Thoughts are with the whole of the motorcycling community.
Poignant words there from Alex Bell, and our thoughts are with the loved ones of all the road racers and indeed notable figures from all sports who we have sadly lost over the past 12 months. In the Manx Grand Prix, Matt Stevenson put in a fine performance to seal the senior win, with wins also coming for Andrew Farrell, Darryl Tweed and James Chalk. This year also saw St George's win an impressive 13th Football League title in 15 years as they were crowned Canada Live Premier League champions. They also won the Hospital Cup, whilst Corinthians won the 2017-18 season's other 2 cup competitions, the FA and Railway Cups. In rugby, Vaggers ended a woeful run of form that saw them beat Aldershot for their first win in almost a year and a half, but unfortunately they couldn't turn their form around to prevent relegation. Bacchus A clinched the PwC Men's Premier League in the hockey, whilst Vikings A were the victors in the women's top flight. And this month, Vikings Mixed A ended a 29-year wait for a top flight title as they ended Bacchus A's spell of 6 successive wins. The Isle of Man sent a senior netball team away to Gibraltar for their first ever international tournament, where the girls set the place alight and were delighted with a second-place finish and a silver medal. Plenty of highs and lows and a real roller coaster of emotions over the last 12 months, which will stay with many for a lifetime. 2019 will likely offer no different, with the Island Games just one of many events taking place, And whatever happens in the world, sport remains sport and will always offer drama and excitement akin to nothing else on the planet.
And that's it for 2018. Who knows what 2019 will bring, but whatever, it will be here on Manx Radio. Thank you to my colleagues, all contributors, and for you for listening. A very happy new year. Gonna go home now, Tim.